If you're one of the hundreds of thousands of people that have been watching my videos about the infected blood scandal, videos like this that went viral, then I ask you to pay attention with me right now, because what I'm about to do is the most important thing I've done in 30 years of fighting on behalf of the Australian victims of the infected blood scandal. 3 years ago, I was made a witness to an overseas legal investigation. In fact, it's the largest legal investigation in British history. And it's their inquiry into the infected blood scandal. The reason that I was made a witness was because there are a large number of people in the UK who were infected and affected by contaminated blood, HIV and hepatitis C, contaminated blood transfusions and tainted blood treatments. And this happened before the 2000s. And some of the victims in the United Kingdom believe that they may have ended up being infected with deadly viruses as a result of having seen Australian-made blood products that were exported. Okay? Now, I was made a witness, and the irony was, as the pandemic, the COVID pandemic began, I was giving evidence for the whole of 2020, basically, about another virus, and a virus or viruses that were hundreds of times more deadly than COVID. Okay, so while everyone was being masked up and locked down, I was talking about a virus that the Australian government were engaged in a criminal cover-up over. So they get locking everyone down, they're forcing everyone or coercing everyone into these ineffective and sometimes dangerous injections, whilst engaging in a major cover-up about how the Australian government had distributed tens of thousands of contaminated blood products, okay, and blood transfusions to people in Australia and around the world. Now, my contribution to this campaign is coming to an end. At the end of the year, I'm going to have to retire, and the reason for that is because of my health. For decades, I was the healthier one of our group, and I was also younger than many people, having been infected as a kid. Unfortunately, I knew other children like me, other Aussie kids who were infected, people who didn't even need blood products to survive. They were given it as part of a treatment, and they became infected with HIV and succumbed to AIDS or succumbed to hepatitis C. And that left just me. But there's other people in our group who, were affected by blood transfusions. They've got liver cancer, liver cirrhosis. They've been very ill. And so, I was fighting on behalf of myself and tens of thousands of Australians, many of whom were people like women who basically were given tainted blood transfusions during childbirth, and who now have lost everything. They've lost their health, their wealth, and even their families. It's a major scandal, and no help's coming, and we know it. And for many decades, I told the victims in our group, I didn't agree with them when they said that the government were deliberately denying support to lower the bill so that we'd all basically die off, right? Well, because I was the leader of this group, I didn't want to be seen as a hothead in that way. Although as the years have gone by, as more people have died, we've lost hundreds of people from our group because of a denial of help, I have become more angry. That earlier on, perhaps as I was more naive when I was younger, in the 1990s and so on, I didn't agree with them that the government were deliberately denying help. I thought it must just be a confusion. There must be something that the government's missed. Well, no, they were right and I was wrong. The government and Mark Butler, Australia's Health Minister, and our nation's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, are deliberately denying help to the Australian survivors of the infected blood scandal and their affected family members. And so on that basis, I know that my time contributing to this scandal is coming to an end. I've done more than enough to force a Royal Commission of Inquiry, as have members of our group at Infected Blood Australia. They've sacrificed their rights to privacy. They've made submissions to a cover-up, a 2004 Senate committee that was supposed to get us all help and look into what went wrong, and instead it found that the government and the Australian Red Cross and the blood products manufacturer CSL had acted and best science advice, best health advice, when it's a complete fraud and a complete criminal lie. The Australian Senate are part of the criminal cover-up of this scandal. Now, I've had many people who know about these things tell me that my life's been in danger. And in fact, in that video that went viral, I said that the reasons why I don't care anymore is because I've got failing health. And my time is taken up now trying to get access to public health, and basically for years we're denied it. It's very, very difficult when you're poor, when you've been a tainted blood victim, okay, or a survivor. of this. So what I'm going to do is this statement of mine was published a couple of years ago. It's a long read. It's full of criminal evidence about how tens of thousands of Australians were criminally aggrieved and how thousands of Australians were murdered. Yes, murdered, including children. A larger than acceptable number of children. Well, is there ever an acceptable number? But yeah, a huge amount of children were killed by contaminated blood, and that's part of the criminal cover-up, okay? We've got some seriously bad people in our government. Mark Butler, Australia's health minister, is a seriously bad egg. And before he gets away with what he's intending to do, yeah, I'm going to step in. And what I'm going to do is, over a course of videos, I'm going to read out my statement, right? Because it would be too long a read to subject you to in one read. But I am, over a course of videos, going to read out the whole thing for you to listen to, and so that you'll understand why it is that before I finish my contribution to this campaign, I will be going to the police, and I'll be going to the international community as well to make sure that, Mark Butler and the Australian Labor government, who are part of this criminal cover-up, okay, part of this terrible disgrace, they deserve to be jailed, okay? I'm going to make sure that they don't get away with what they're doing. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this series of reading out my statement by reading out the last 5 pages of this statement of mine. It's available on the Infected Blood Inquiry's website, but the last 5 pages feature my letter on behalf of Australia to the Infected Blood Inquiry's chair. Now, this is a former High Court judge called Sir Brian Langstaff. And as per inquiry rules, this is what happened. In 2020 or 2019, around about then, I was sent a Rule 9 request by the Infected Blood Inquiry in the UK. And I have, I complied with their request. And apparently, as per the rules of these British inquiries, the chair of this inquiry, Sir Brian Langstaff, gets a letter from me. And in that letter, I'm allowed to, basically tell him what I think needs to be done, or ask him what his opinion is. Okay, what does he think? What are his recommendations? And I've done this on behalf of Australia because I'm very concerned that the tens of thousands of Australians that are infected and affected by this scandal, as I've said earlier on in this video, I'm very concerned that they're going to be killed off by deliberate denial of support by Australia's Health Minister, Mark Butler, and by our nation's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. So I'm hoping that Sir Brian Langstaff, when his inquiry concludes, he is apparently set to respond to this letter, and I'm hoping that he'll respond by calling on his Australian counterparts in our judiciary here and in our legal system to call for a legal review into how tens of thousands of Australians ended up with HIV and hepatitis C. And now I'll start reading out these last few pages. There'll be a slight difference in audio quality because I'll be doing it off a screen recording, but I hope you can bear with me. Thank you. Here in Australia, we see the Infected Blood Inquiry as if we are peering over a fence, watching our British friends being liberated while we remain in a state of grief, barely surviving under the exact same public health scandal. Thousands of Australians have acquired deadly hepatitis C and HIV from blood transfusions and blood products. What happened to victims and their families in the UK also happened to victims here, but our accounts, and in particular those of haemophiliacs, remain untold. Health chiefs have been dismissive of the need for legal investigation. The former chairman of the Australian Council for Safety and Quality in Healthcare, Professor Bruce Barraclough, himself having investigated infected blood, told ABC Radio in 2003, "My personal view is that to spend the millions that would be necessary for a significant judicial inquiry over a long period of time are unlikely to produce benefit to current patients or people with hepatitis C." We feel that attitude lies at the heart of the problem, the long-held belief that justice would be of no benefit to thousands of Australian infected blood victims and their families. The government's response has always been about diminishing the scale and severity of the problem. They have distorted critical data sets, which have led to a lack of reporting from media and complete disbelief from our fellow Australians that something as horrifying as this could ever have happened. We believe the net effect of that explains why, unlike the BBC, our national broadcaster, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, despite pleas from victims, have never once conducted an investigation into Australia's infected blood scandal. In 2017, victims were even denied a right of reply after the broadcaster read out an on-air statement from Australian blood products manufacturer CSL, which stated that for over 100 years they had been driven by a promise to improve the quality of life for people with rare and serious diseases. It is the hope of all Australian victims of contaminated blood that the acceptance of my evidence into the UK Infected Blood Inquiry will inform and encourage a recommendation that a similar statutory inquiry take place in Australia. I am for the first time telling my own personal story to the Infected Blood Inquiry in the hope that my evidence will be persuasive in obtaining such a recommendation from Sir Brian Langstaff, but also that the public nature of the infected blood in the UK will raise awareness and promote a wider understanding of how appallingly its closely connected neighbours in Australia had been treated. One of the key issues that I asked for the Infected Blood Inquiry to consider is where all of this began in terms of the relationship between the UK and Australia. Going back to the case of the poor little boy known as H, who was infected with HIV, it is sickening to me to consider that the authorities couldn't safeguard a child of his age. Rather than turning to the rest of the Commonwealth, such as the UK, for assistance on how to support H and his family, instead the Commonwealth came together not to help him, but instead to weaken his case for assistance. The type of psychological, financial and medical support already available to victims in the UK has never been made available to victims in Australia. In fact, the way that Australian victims have been treated by their government actually has had the effect of frightening them and deterring them from protesting against their treatment, campaigning for an inquiry or pursuing proceedings against the government or CSL. There were many frustrations experiencing life with bone marrow failure as a contaminated blood victim, but it was around 1999-2000 that I realised that the government was waging a war on contaminated blood victims and that there was a serious battle to be fought. In 2000, medical professionals denied me storage of my stem cells due to my infection with hepatitis C. So for someone with my health condition, severe aplastic anemia, the storage of my stem cells may have been the difference between life and death. They denied me the dream I had fought for since the age of 16 and the confidence that I could live and plan a long-term future. I was also pressured to take the drug interferon, which I was worried would have devastating side effects, possibly even killing me, given the precarious nature of my bone marrow. But doctors dismissed my concerns. As a result, even though I have life-threatening conditions, I have never returned to them. Exhibit WITN 3939042 is the letter I received from Catherine Beauchamp, author of the Red Alert report. In her letter, she expressed her concerns about the way CSL would likely behave if anyone tried to go up against them or properly investigated their activities, stating, "You should expect CSL to hire PRs to prowl around in case something adverse gets dropped into the public arena and to watch people like yourselves and try and infiltrate your ranks, offering stuff. All this has happened before and common sense tells you it will happen again, as the truth could utterly ruin CSL and possibly bankrupt the Commonwealth as well. They will not allow this to happen and will deal coldly and ruthlessly with anyone who looks like exposing them. Despite the dangers, I have dedicated my life to fighting and campaigning on behalf of the victims of contaminated blood in Australia. Back in the 90s and 2000s, haemophiliacs were terrified, to put it mildly. There was no recombinant product on offer. That was only given to those who didn't have HIV or hepatitis C. This meant that none of the haemophiliacs I knew received recombinant because they were all infected. As a result, haemophiliacs were afraid to attach their names to public campaigning for fear of being denied supply of blood products. They also feared cold shoulder treatment at the haemophilia clinics. Because of this, I took up the cause on their behalf and ask the tougher questions for them, and it has been my honour and privilege to do so. It is our contention that the authorities in the UK, it is our contention that had the authorities in the UK accurately reported the established risks of factor VIII to the Commonwealth, then, in 1978, Australia would not have started switching otherwise healthy haemophiliacs treated with the blood product cryoprecipitate to factor VIII. Little boys like H would never have been given an injection in 1983, 5 years after factor VIII was introduced, for superficial bruising that transmitted HIV/AIDS to him and created the most appalling outcome imaginable. A campaigner in the group has told me that since the commencement of the UK inquiry, every day has felt like a year, because we know that the UK inquiry is our last chance. We are in bad shape here. Victims have been totally abandoned. There has been no counselling at all. The man was recently called over by telephone by a liver specialist to tell him he had developed liver cancer. 2 weeks later, he was being asked about whether he was an IV drug user who shared needles by his new doctor. A liver transplant specialist, name protected, like his haemophiliac brother, name protected, who had a liver transplant 3 years before him, now faces the most uncertain of futures. Will he be eligible for a transplant? What guarantee is there that he will even survive one? The experience of the protective name, the family, is typical of what has happened to haemophilia families in Australia. This family has gone from supervising 100 plus workforce with a young family and a mortgage to being forced to live in a public housing on a disability support pension. The man has had 3 grueling rounds of treatment for his hepatitis C infection. 2 of those treatments took 6 months and had side effects equivalent to chemotherapy. He, like so many victims, also has to experience the highs and lows of waiting every 6 months on tests, hoping for good news. The horrifying consequences and mistreatment of thousands of haemophilia families is not just the UK's worst treatment scandal, but also that of the Commonwealth's. What blood went where and to whom? We know that haemophiliacs in Australia were infected en masse by Australian blood products, but there has been no investigation into exactly where these high-risk Australian blood products were exported to. What happened to potential recipients in New Zealand, across Southeast Asia, to Europe and to the UK? The conundrum for the Commonwealth is, now that the British infected blood victims are likely to access support and justice, what will be done about victims of the exact same scandal in Australia? Are we to be forever left in the cycle of suffering and dying at the hands of the worst of injustices, so much of which was influenced by leading British experts and British blood products? I want to thank Sir Brian Langstaff for accepting my evidence into the infected blood inquiry. I hope that I have demonstrated the close links between the highly placed individuals in blood services in the UK and Australia, that there was much sharing of information, that infected blood was taken from Australia back to the UK, and the UK is culpable in exporting its culture of secrecy and cover-up into Australia. I hope that I have demonstrated the strong parallels between the UK Haemophilia Society and the Haemophilia Foundation Australia, both in their culpability and their treatment of victims of contaminated blood. This is hugely important in obtaining the full picture of what actually happened in the UK, assisting the inquiry in its pursuit to find out the truth about how many thousands were infected and killed. Finally, I wish to ask Sir Brian, on behalf of all the victims in Australia who have suffered so horrifically, to make a recommendation to the Australian government that an independent judge-led statutory inquiry takes place in Australia with the power to properly investigate CSL and the Australian Red Cross. Victims in Australia deserve the opportunity to be heard, to find out the truth about what happened to them, and for reparations to be made to the fullest possible extent. So there we have it. That was basically my life's work. My health is not doing too well, and I now fortunately have access to a GP. For the last couple of years, or while I was a witness of this UK infected blood inquiry, we had a terrible scenario with our public health system here in New South Wales, and I couldn't get a bulk billing GP to look after me, and that's changed now. And I've now been sent to a haematologist, a specialist, to look after my bone marrow failure. But I'm also, I've basically given decades of my life. I've got nothing more to give. Everything hinges on Sir Brian Langstaff, basically, and he's set to give his reply, his answer as to whether he'll recommend our own legal investigation here into our nation's deadliest medical scandal by about September of this year. And that's why I need to ask for your help to survive to September. I can't even pay my electricity bill. And over the weekend, despite having had a tooth removed, which I had paid for by my GoFundMe, thank you to those people, I couldn't even afford a Panadol. Now, I do have $300 that's been kindly donated over the weekend that's gone into my account. Thank you to those people. That's now going to go towards having to pay food costs. But I've got electricity coming, which is I'm already late for, which is $400, and a whole bunch of other things. And our computer for Infected Blood Australia also, we haven't been able to replace it. It's just too much for us. So our campaign is coming to an end. I believe we've done enough, and I believe the law and Australia's judiciary will agree with me. And I'm hoping that Sir Brian Langstaff, the chair of the UK Infected Blood Inquiry, agrees with me. For many decades, I never asked for any donations, and in fact, I hope to be able to conclude this mission to try and get justice for the Australian victims of this scandal without ever having asked for a donation. I've given hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own money to this. Yes, I have. I've financially ruined myself, but I've lost many mates because of this, and I might be dying in the time ahead, I don't know. So it's no loss to me. I'm proud of it, I really am. It's my life story. But I tell you what, to those people who've since November have been donating to my GoFundMe, I'd like to hug each and every one of you at the end of the year, if you'd allow that. I'm going to arrange meetings to say thank you. And to those of you who can help me survive until Sir Brian Langstaff gives his answer, okay, I'll share more of this. This is my GoFundMe, and I'll share a link with this video. Anything at all, $10, $20, it'll all go towards paying for food and paying bills. I just have to get to September until I retire. And I'm going to retire. My life's work, my contribution to the infected blood scandal will end on the ending of the UK Infected Blood Inquiry and on Sir Brian Langstaff's opinion about what should be done about the Australian situation and what should be done for the Australian victims and their loved ones of the infected blood scandal. Thank you.